it's not haunted, but it has a very interesting history. We are very fortunate here at the Barron County Museum to have a wood Soo Line caboose. The Soo Line Railroad is very important to Barron County. The Soo Line Railroad was constructed by the millers in Minneapolis to get their flour to the East Coast. Originally, they had to ship through Chicago and were getting very high tariffs. They didn't want to pay that. So they built a mainline railroad just to the north. It borders our property out here, and that was the first railroad built by the Soo Line to go to the East Coast. It went from Minneapolis to Sault Ste. Marie and out to New York and Boston, etc. This railroad eventually became over 6,000 miles, but the historic part is that the very first rails were laid right at Cameron, 1 mile to the east here. The Omaha Railroad bought the rail and ties up in 1883, 1884, dumped them off at Cameron, and the railroad built west to Turtle Lake and east to Bruce. So the Soo Line Railroad actually started right here in Barron County, and the first rails were laid only 1 mile away. We are fortunate to have this wood caboose that was built in 1907 for the Soo Line Railroad. It is a wood caboose, which everything was built in wood in those days, and it's red. Now, we always think of cabooses being red, but they weren't always red, but many of them were. And so this is restored to its original condition. We've had it for 5 years, and we're almost done restoring, but it is open for you to come and view right now. Let's take a little tour inside the caboose. We got some interesting things in there. So in here, we have at the front 2 bunks where people could sit and they could also sleep. They'd have a probably a sleeping bag and blankets, and they could sleep there. They're kind of short, so the men must not have been very tall. Next up back here, we have an ice box. It's missing a handle right now, but this would be a box where they put in ice and keep their things cool for eating. We have the original stove, which was built in 1905. And that's been restored. It's not operable, but it looks very authentic. And right behind it is the coal box for burning coal in the caboose. Over here we have the conductor's desk. 2 people would ride in the caboose, the conductor and the rear brakeman. The conductor's job was to keep track of all the paperwork for all the cars that had to go to different destination places. And the brakeman's job was to couple and uncouple cars and throw the switches. And one of their jobs was to watch for problems on the train. So right behind the camera here is called the cupola. And they would sit up in there and look down the track, especially around curves, and look for any problems with the train. And back a little further, we have our sink, and they'd have a water can here for their cold water for drinking, and of course they dump it right down onto the tracks. And then there are just 2 storerooms for storing things here, one here and one behind the camera. And we're missing one very important part of a caboose, of course, and this has not been restored, but this is the biffy. Okay, we'll end our little story here with a story about the conductor in this caboose in 1947. The conductor was on this caboose, and the freight train was going into a siding to let a passenger train pass. But without radios, a miscommunication, The freight train was not in a siding. The passenger train hit this train about 5 cars in front of the caboose. It hit so hard it derailed the caboose, but it also turned the steam engine of the passenger train on its side, and the steam from the steam engine came pouring into this caboose and scalded the conductor to death. And the poor conductor had been in 3 accidents in 1947. Of course, this was the end one. So it's not haunted, but it has a very interesting history. And so we're restoring this to its original condition to enjoy learning about the history of railroads in Barron County.